Yeah, here we are.
Hello.
Hi, everyone who is filtering in. Um, we've got Shiko, who I've seen in the Discord discussing the book already. Hi. Um, Zentoro's here. We've got people who will filter in, but hello, everybody. Today we are joined by Sabrina of Answer in Progress, whom many of you will know. And gosh,
I appreciate that you called it answer in progress because the sheer amount of times that we've been called answers in progress is
oh
impressive.
no.
And also, I went to this YouTube event the other day, and it was a beautiful throwback because they listed my URL as nerdy and quirky.
See, the thing is, I don't know if you noticed this, but I had to pause a little bit before I said Sabrina from Answer in Progress.
We can never escape our past.
Yeah, listen, I have been It's Radish Time for my entire YouTube career, and like every 6 to 12 months, I'm like, hey guys, what if I changed to my name? And everyone's like, don't do it. We'll leave.
I recently learned what a radish was because I, for a very long time, kind of assumed that it was a turnip.
Oh,
But they're not the same.
they're not.
Yeah.
See, I don't know this because I'm not actually like that into radishes. um, the username came from a computer game I played as a child called Peter Rabbit's Math Garden,
Mm-hmm.
where you solved math problems, and then when you won, Peter Rabbit, the children's book character, jumps out and goes, "It's radish time," and radishes ring from the top of the screen. Um,
So you weren't a fan of radishes. You were a fan of
I mean, like I like
rewards.
them fine.
Ah,
Mostly this was just like a thing, like an inside joke in my family that followed me around for the rest of my life.
that's a way to do it. Anyway, this
Yeah.
book, huh?
Book. Today we're talking about Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano. Um, so folks who are regulars to this Hopepunk book club will know that we often read like speculative fiction, stuff set in the future, uh, policy-ish nonfiction books about what we could do in the future. But this book was written in 1950, was it three? Anyway, in the past.
Oh, it's an old book.
So I thought, when Sabrina mentioned this as a possible pick, I was really excited about what a book written decently well into the past could tell us about the future, especially about the future of the internet, which we did not have at the time of the writing of the book.
Yeah.
um, so before we get into discussing it, and can you share with the class why you thought this book might be a good pick for today's?
Yeah. Yeah. So first off, I enjoy a Kurt Vonnegut. He's my favorite sad little man who writes words. He writes some words that I question more than others, but for the most part, I like how his approach to sci-fi in general because it's near sci-fi. It always feels like it is at the brink of happening, and it feels really relevant in the way that technology and the stuff that he talks about could potentially impact our lives. Some of them are further out in the blue. Some of them are very much more like wackadoodle than reality. But I always enjoy how centered humans are in such a technology impacted story. Like sometimes sci-fi just becomes all about the technology, or it becomes
Yeah,
like so distant from my sense of reality that I'm like, this is a fun story, but it's basically high fantasy, but with robots instead of
yeah,
elves. Vonnegut's sci-fi books always feel a bit like, oh, that's a little real. You were from so
yeah.
long ago. How could you have seen this coming? Is humanity that predictable? So
Right.
when I was
Are
reading
we doing
Player
the same
Piano,
things over and over?
oh no, are we supposed to learn from history? Yeah. So then when you're talking about the themes of the book club, I was Oh, and I saw like some of the other books that you were reading or thinking about reading about AI. I was actually about halfway through this book already. And I was like, hey, if you want to think about how technology like generative AI nowadays might be impacting humans and how humans might be responding to that. I'm seeing a lot of that happening in this book. It's not AI, it's not software, it's all hardware, but it's hardware and sci-fi in the sense that it's like very hand wavy. It's just like, oh yeah, the machine can just do it. There's no technical backing to it. You just trust it. So I thought like this is a good like concrete way to approach AI without having to think about the code behind AI, which takes up a lot of the modern conversation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted you to be a co-host this season is because you know what AI is, and I do not. But as I was reading that, I like that you mentioned, it's kind of hand wavy. They just say the machines do the stuff now, and everybody else kind of lets them. I thought it was actually like eerily similar to how we talk about AI now, which is just sort of like the computer that knows things and it makes the words appear and the pictures. And so I was like, it's actually like really quite appropriate that it doesn't get into the explanation of how any of this works. It's just there's occasionally like a slip of the hand of like, and sometimes they mess up and people die.
Yeah. I think
yeah.
I think the thing that I found so interesting about it was that it is like this very to go back to like what you said about like what is AI. AI is more than just machine learning, although what we're seeing nowadays referenced as AI is very much the results of machine learning, which is you take a bunch of data, you give it to a computer, and you'd ask the computer, hey, can you find some patterns here? And then the computer's like, I found some patterns. So give me more data and I could like reimagine those patterns and then spit something back out. AI in general, though, is more than just that specific execution of it. It's really any form of a thing that an artificial thing can do that humans then perceive as intelligence. So when people are like, when I'm texting ChatGPT, it feels like I'm texting a person. That is artificial intelligence in my opinion, its truest form. But there's a lot of arguments to be made around whether or not it's true artificial intelligence. I could get into the whole world of what old school, like the original approaches to artificial intelligence was, and all that stuff, but it's a bit boring.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I appreciate that explanation of it because I think that there's not a lot of like super great like science communication about how this works. And I think it's particularly because like the people who stand to make a lot of money off of it really like us all to be like quite credulous about like it knows things rather than it's just like it's feeding us back patterns that it sees in this stuff. It's like this is not a living being experiencing emotion or like creative insight in any way. And I feel like I've gotten that from the videos that I've watched of yours where you're like, uh-oh, it picked up on this signal way too hard.
Keep saving these cats, dang it. But I think like in terms of the idea of people who are in power feeling like they benefit and being incented to really push the value of machines without ever being critical of what they do and their impact is really prevalent in this book. I think the interesting thing between this book and reality is that the machines, for all of their faults, do seem to work, which is not the case for a lot of the claims around machines in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating where I was like, okay, so we're presented with the picture where, machines have replaced most of human activity. And then like everybody gets like a UBI, like a universal basic income, and their needs are provided for, and they have like a pretty decent house, and they don't have to cook or clean anymore because the machines do that. And yet there's an ennui. And like,
Yeah.
part of that sounds actually good.
It like paints this image of what like the most basic pro AI argument is, right? Like the benefits of automation, the benefits of like taking on this technology is that it frees up a human. And they even go so far as to like take the non-capitalist approach to it. It's not like, oh, the machine can help you out so you can do even more. It's like the machine can do it so you don't need to do anything anymore. It's interesting seeing like that divergence in imagined future. One
Mhm.
is like almost a reality, but um, it's interesting how both of them kind of suck for the average person.
Right. Yeah, it's like I feel like the ways that we're talking about it right now are just very, you know, we'll replace all of the sort of like creative impulses of humans so that we can all do really boring work. And here it's like, well, we replaced all the boring mechanical stuff, so now you have all this free time. And either way, people are quite miserable, and yeah, it sort of feels like, well, maybe it's just, you know, a lot of the book is talking about people need a reason to feel valuable, and
Mhm.
you know, we're pulling that value out of different places now. But yeah, I guess it's interesting because it's like I feel like the book imagines a world where, um, you know, people have less to do and they're upset about that, and it just sort of seems like in actuality we're just coming up with other things for people to do. Like I kept thinking when reading this, have you ever read Bullshit Jobs?
Yep.
Yeah,
No
I was just
doubt.
like, oh, we're just all becoming bullshit jobs, and
Mhm.
sort of like the jobs that remain in the book are actually useful. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way that you envisioned that like we would be reduced to the most like actual useful stuff, where it's sort of like, you know, we're instead kind of making up fake email jobs.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I see it. Like it. I would imagine that the jobs that is it David Graeber, in
Yeah,
Bullshit Jobs, what he was describing there feels very much like the stuff that Proteus and the gang in the
yeah,
Meadows are up to, where they're just like, our job is very important. Our
yeah,
job is to watch the thing that already does the thing. We can
yeah,
sometimes fix it, but it's there's too many of us. We're all management.
yeah,
Um, but I guess the actual ultimate bullshit job in this book is like the Rex and the Reeks and all that folk
yeah,
who
where I'm
are
like,
just like they
it's
don't need to work.
that to me, yeah, reminded me of just sort of like you know, what it seemed like the Reeks and Rex were doing all of the you know, whatever was called essential labor in like
Mm.
early pandemic, where it's like, oh, the people that we pay the least
Oh,
are the ones who have to, like, you know, paint lines on roads and like pick up trash and like do all these things that we need to live.
to live. Yeah.
Um,
I found it really interesting reading about them because you're right that they are essentially that analog to our reality. But
mhm.
while I was reading it, I was always thinking like they could have also made a machine for this. This
Yeah,
was not necessary. It's almost like they demanded a certain amount of labor from someone, something to really delineate the idea of like being a manager, being an engineer versus being a
right.
normie.
Because you
Like,
can't not have a job.
exactly.
It's like illegal, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there was, I think the thing that I enjoyed was this one character. We only hear about him through his wife, I think. He's the one who's a writer. He like
Mhm.
spends all this time writing this book, and he's determined to have a bad time, as all writers do, as all writers are.
Yeah.
Um, and like everything about the world around him doesn't enable that. And
Mhm.
I think it's like this weird theme in this book where it's just like humans, like you could have like this most perfect system the system that, like, if you explained it to anyone, like, they would think, oh, this is ideal. This is the obvious choice. And that simple human desire to have a bad time and write about it felt like the most poignant example of, like, no, you could describe that ideal system, but sometimes people don't want ideal. Even Paul Proteus, he's just like, I got my dream job. I am the ultimate Nepo baby. Have you considered a farm, though?
Yeah, it's like, I gotta suffer for my art, man. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting, and Chica's in the comments sort of talking about, like, it's a weird relationship to physical labor. Like, the two jobs that if you're not, smart enough to be an engineer or manager, you either are in the army or the Reeks and Racks doing, like, manual labor. And I don't know, it made me think a lot about all these discussions we have right now about, like, what's wrong with men? And it's like,
war.
They don't have, they need a war, they need purpose. And it's like, people really do sort of feel like they need to be struggling against something in order to kind of make sense of why they, get out of bed in the morning. And, it's sort of interesting, like, even sort of the counter movement of the ghost shirts that are like, we gotta restore the world to the people, and we gotta take down all the machines. Oh no, now we took down too many machines. We gotta build them again. Is there's no sort of satisfied end point.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Lasher, who was basically just like, we did it just to prove that we could, it was the principle of the thing.
Yeah, we just needed a little project.
Don't we all? But yeah, I really enjoy, like, in general, the way that this book really paints the futility of a lot of the actions, but it doesn't really. You could say that it was like, what's it called? It wasn't making it seem like it was a good thing that a lot of these characters were really getting caught up in their own heads a lot of the time. But I like how it was just present in every single character that was in the book, that they were just like, yeah, I'm stuck between these two worlds and there isn't a right answer. So I'm going to kind of do the dumb thing because there is no right thing to do. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the ability to admit we're all here to have a bad time.
Yeah, I do think this is a departure from a lot of the books we've read for over the course of the life of the book club, which is, a lot of, like, Hopepunk fiction is sort of like, we've been struggling for hundreds of years, and this is how we arrive at a future where we've finally achieved the life that we want. And I'm like, I'm always trying to encourage people to think of that. And yet this book sort of lands on this conclusion of, like, no such thing exists, which I felt like was at least honest.
Yeah. I'll say this. I think the thing that strikes me about this book, and the fact that it gives you such an idealized world, maybe it has its faults here or there, but for the most part, like, it seems like it's on the brink of being something good. It could be something good. But you can imagine with all of these characters, regardless of the situation they end up in, they still won't find that sense of satisfaction that they all are craving in any world. Like, Ed Finnerty's just here to smoke cigarettes and not drop off the ash for way too long. He's just here to cause chaos. And it's like, I think that it's really interesting to see how a person's sense of satisfaction can kind of be independent of the world around them, of the society around them. Now, there's, what's that fella's name? The guy that Halyard's showing around. There's two of them.
One of them's name is Cash Drawer, which I thought was amazing. In the Shah of Bratpur or something. Yeah.
This is my thing. Whenever I read anything, it's just kind of like, I've never tried to pronounce it or register it it as a sound. It's
Yeah.
just an image in my head. Anyway, the way that they represent like this kind of alternate world as well, like this completely different society that does have the same themes of just like, yeah, like people are just going to find a sense, people aren't finding that satisfaction in their world, or like they need to find satisfaction independent of their world. Kind of, it kind of is what I took away from this, right? Like you aren't going to be able to rely on a piece of technology or a person or some action or movement to really solve all your problems.
Ouch.
I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, I think that takes us very, very nicely into the sort of the unifying question of Hopepunk Book Club, which is what does this book make you believe about the future? And I'm interested, folks watching, to hear your answers as well in the chat. But yeah, this was one of the tougher books for me to kind of come up with what my answer would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that you're like, yeah, there's we kind of have to find our happiness and meaning independent of something in the world, and that makes me think a lot about my relationship to online communities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've been on YouTube for long enough to remember sort of the days of like, this is going to change everything. We're going to take the media and we're going to put it in the hands of the people.
It's democratized now.
Yeah. Now it's going to be real. People who didn't have voices have voices. And we sort of saw, we've kind of lived through the failure of that now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of interesting. I feel like that I was so credulous of it in like the mid 2000s. And now we've gone through kind of several rounds of, well, actually, it's this platform that's going to democratize information, and this one's going to fix everything. And now I'm not, like, especially when we talk about AI, I'm like, I'm not buying this argument anymore from anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the answer is less me going like, no, actually, this one's going to destroy everything, and so we got to fight it. It's just sort of like, I can just maybe close the screen and go outside and be out there for a little while and just sort of maybe associate my happiness or future less with the failure or success of a single piece of technology.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I think I'm kind of in the same boat, in the sense that like we've seen the way technology has failed to like fulfill its promises. We've seen the way technologies have failed to like fulfill their threats. Like people like NFTs. This is going to take over the market. Cryptocurrency, say goodbye to the US dollar. But then we saw how like those fell apart, right?
Yeah.
Like technology definitely changes things, but the way that we talk about it in the present is often just not comparable to the way that it actually impacts us in the future. And I think that is relevant to this book, in the sense that we get to see these extremes, and yet how normal people's lives actually seem, how normal their problems, how relatable their problems are, right, despite living in this completely like different world that we live in. But in terms of how like that makes me think about the future, it is just a reminder of like we're on this like hedonic treadmill. Like the world can be changing quite drastically. We might be hearing a bunch of different messages, and climate change is definitely one of the messages that like isn't so much like, oh, who knows. When it's existential, we should like, when it's provably existential,
right,
we should listen. But like for a lot of these smaller claims, like it won't. This is weird to say, I guess, but I don't believe that it'll impact my life in the way that the headlines promise. It won't change my life. It won't ruin my life in the way that the headlines promise. And in fact, like the time that Paul feels like the deepest sense of belonging is when he finds this singular moment of purpose with other people. Like it was a stance. It was a stance related to technology, but he specifically found his purpose around people who he could agree with, who he could believe in, and with a message that he could tell. And so like the book makes me think about the future is that this is going to repeat itself. Everything's going to keep repeating itself, but most things are going to be driven by humans, a little bit of human greed, a little bit of human naivety, a little bit of weird fantasy and power fantasy.
Yeah. I think Shika said in chat, it makes me think about how control of technology broadly is difficult to navigate, and that's also something that I was thinking about reading this. Is just after when we see kind of the ghost shirts, they're tearing down all the machines, and then they go, oh, well, actually, we want some of these. And then they start putting them back together again. It's like, it's actually less that people were against the technology, but they were upset about who controlled the technology.
Yeah.
That's what is there's like a classic Hank Green tweet that's like, nobody wants no moderation. Everyone just wants to be in control of how things are moderated. And that sort of, that it's not actually like AI, this sort of nebulous specter of technology that'll replace us all. That's the problem. It's who are the people building these tools? How are they thinking about how they're going to be used? How are they anticipating what we're going to use them for? And it's like we all kind of secretly want to be the ones who decide. Like,
I don't know. I'm kind of like maybe that's a lot of pressure, but I do think like it shouldn't be any individual person, right? Like this is the common discourse within like a lot of AI ethicist communities, where it's just like it's really important for people to engage with AI rather than like poo-poo it out the window, because it is going to happen, because there are people who are incented to create it, to make it happen, to sell it, to see it proliferate. But the only way that you can make sure that it is representative of you, of your values, that it isn't just completely like labeling you as a criminal, even though you did nothing wrong. That applied in the book and in real life. Like, in order for that to make sure that doesn't happen, somebody often unfortunately needs to experience it to call attention to the problem. And that can only happen out of engaging. I realized I was about to start a list and I forgot where the list went. I will say the most relatable thing out of this book, though, is that Paul really saw all of this technology stuff, and he for a second was like, maybe I should be a little cottagecore girly. Maybe I should just live on a farm.
I also like quite love that he's like, I'm gonna buy this farm and I'm gonna, go off the grid and I'm gonna live my life and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go against the system. And like he does this, he buys it, and then he goes there once and then never again.
He went there one more time. He went there one more time because he was like, I want to learn how to take care of the land from the caretaker that was there.
Right.
And then he did it once and he was like, that sucked so bad.
That's right. I really appreciate that, like, there's all this setup of like, this is gonna be the other way. And then it just kind of goes away.
It really goes away in like this, like it's like multiple chapters of him fantasizing about this house, and then it's like almost a throwaway, like latter half of a paragraph, not even its full dedicated paragraph, just half of one, where he's like, yeah, that didn't work. I hated it. Manual labor sucks.
Yeah, I think about that sort of thing every time I think about like, what's my exit strategy for all of this? Because like, look, I'm still here. And I've had a lot of friends who like came up, making content with me who were like, all right, I'm leaving that behind now. I'm an adult. I'm going to go do another thing. And I'm like, I can't. This is all that I am. And, you know, as much as I'm like, yeah, you know, social media in a lot of ways, I feel like has ruined our relationships with each other and has imparted no other skills on me. Like,
You're
I
being
don't
way too
want
hard
it to,
on yourself.
yeah, like I don't want it to go away. And so I guess what I'm struggling with now is like, how do we not end up in this like really nihilistic place where it's like, yeah, we silly people are gonna kind of go round and round on our little hamster wheels forever, and we're never really gonna resolve anything, and it's gonna seem like it gets better, and then it's gonna get worse, and it just doesn't really, you know, it kind of just
Yeah.
equilibrates in the middle. Like, how do we push beyond that? Because I really don't want to end up in the place where, like, speaking of climate change, where people go, yeah, but the corporations are going to do what they're going to do, and we're all going to die, and so just like whatever. Um,
Yeah.
I
You,
I don't want
you
that
know
to get in the
what?
way of people trying.
I do find it interesting because I'm going to bring up a character related to this who might not be the perfect fit in like if she was in the real world, but like I think in the
Mhm.
book, Anita is this really remarkable character, which surprised me because Kurt Vonnegut's women are sometimes not as nuanced, or maybe I was just like really, I was
Yeah.
really like projecting. But I thought that Anita was
Mhm.
really interesting because she's dealt a bit of a shit hand. One, she's a woman in like a world where it's still very Mad Men era kind of approach to women have some rights. They're not
Yeah.
smart enough to work though.
Yeah.
And like she was especially one where like she did have like a lower IQ, like
Mhm.
in and she hates that. She resents the fact that like anything can like take her away, put her back across the river. But I think that she's really interesting in the sense that all of her choices seem to be driven by intent and planning. Like in the way
Mhm.
that Paul was always kind of like, well, I feel weird. I don't like this. So I'm going to fantasize about doing that. And I'm going to
Mhm.
just try and escape the reality of my situation because I don't like it, even though it's a great situation. He's just unhappy. Um, Anita understands that her circumstances are limited. Like
Mhm.
she knows that Paul's a bit weird. She's trying to help Paul for her own gain, and all of that stuff. But she does her best to make it work out for what she wants. Like she acts very much in her own interests. And this isn't me
Mhm.
about to say like, so our response to climate change should be selfishness. Um, but it's more like she's dealt one of the worst hands in the book, and yet she has
Mhm.
one of the better outcomes because she knows what she wants and she kind of guns for it, right? She fights back to Paul when she and Paul are separating. She gives him one last kiss because she knows that she still likes the guy, but you know, she's not stupid.
Yeah.
For whatever that number said about her, she knows that life will be better for her in that circumstance to do this one thing. And I think when approaching larger, more existential problems, we could be a little bit more like Anita and know what we want and act in that way. It's not always going to be easy. Sometimes it'll suck, but like you do have a way, you can be empowered to navigate a situation, even though you have very little control over it.
Yeah. I That's a good point, and I was thinking about that a lot because I'm also in the middle of a Mad Men rewatch. Um,
I
and
am too.
yeah, I kind of, you know, I was thinking a lot about how, you know, characters like Anita, I mean, it sort of reminds me of how, like, I don't know, anytime end up watching like productivity YouTubers and they're like, you got to take a cold shower to become mentally tough. I'm like, you have no real problems. I'm like, I've got plenty of things that have made me mentally tough and resilient. I don't need to inflict more upon myself. Like, did you not live through the past few years? Like, So that sort of that's very like Proteus coded to me. Like actually everything has worked out right for me, and so I need to like go and create problems for myself so that I can feel something. Where like when you have to, kind of come up from a tougher hand, like you know how to be like more creative with it, I guess. And so like I guess that makes me think a lot about like I feel like I've had a sort of reckoning in the past few years where like my whole brand used to be like, you gotta go out and vote. You gotta vote for change. If you want to change stuff, you know where you can do that? In the voting booth. And that's just such a limited set of tools. We're like, yeah, yes,
I still think people should vote.
Yes, I vote in every election. Like I always laugh when it's like, a city council primary and like nobody else in my apartment building gets the mailers but me, because they're like, we know that Taylor, she's gonna go vote. we have a record, but like it's made me think about, what other ways can we solve problems that we don't need to work with an existing system or to ask permission to implement. Like, there's this whole plot of like, Paul's like, all right, well, I want to do this, but I gotta wait until this moment, and then, I've got to make them think that, and like he's just like stewing over what he should do for the entire book, and meanwhile, like Anita's just kind of gone around the back and found another husband, like, and didn't even notice, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, I see where things are heading. Here's my plan A. Here's my plan B. And then, like, if he does this, then maybe I'll go back. And then,
and the entire time, Paul is just thinking that she's some idiot who he can trick into joining this garbage, poorly planned life with him. And she's like, nah, dude, what are you talking about? Like, you're nice, but no.
Yeah. Where he's like, yeah, I've got to come up with a grand plan to re-educate Anita. Then he takes her out to the farm, and she's like, all right, so who else am I going to go marry? Because this isn't going to work out for me. Yeah, it sort of makes me think about like, all right, like if there are these decisions being made without me, what decisions can I make on my own or with my like-minded people that aren't sort of contingent upon what other people who haven't asked my opinion decide.
I like, in terms of like having that response outside of the established system, this is the one thing that I wish was different about this book. There are a couple of things I wish was different, but this is like one big one, where it's like we get to see like these foils of institutions where there's like the folks at the Meadows, the people at the Works who are like, they're all very silly. They all follow this, like, they all find deep meaning in doing their job. But I know that people can find that, but like theirs is silly. They have a whole play about it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are the folks that eventually become the ghost shirts. And like, at an initial reading, I was expecting it to kind of be like, oh, like these are people who are going to do things differently. They're going to change it. But in the same sense, there's still like people who are just like, they want to do something, so they do it for that sake, rather than having like a deeper purpose for it. Like the people who are controlling that conversation are people who don't actually have much desire to see those changes implemented. Right? Like two of their leaders are guys who basically just had excellent jobs, and they were like, I'm kind of bored, so I'm gonna do this instead, right? Like two of like the 5 leaders. And like I just wish that there was like a third party. Maybe there is. Maybe there's like it's scattered in those middle storylines. Like I wish Anita had friends. I wish that Anita had somebody to talk to. I was thinking about the where are Marge Simpson's friends Twitter thread, or like who cries or whatever. It's it would have just been really interesting to see how people who understand the rules of the game and are choosing to navigate it, how they interact with each other. And I would have liked to see that explored a little bit more. But, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. My headcanon is that Anita has friends, that she came up with this, her whole plan
She has
B.
a little girl gang.
Yeah. And just like, you know, her husband never pays attention to her, so he just didn't know.
Yeah. Like, she just has friends over all the time. I would love
Yeah.
to imagine that. That's a beautiful headcanon.
Yeah.
But I guess in that sense, aren't we all Anita? And we just need to find our little girl gang.
Right? I mean, yeah, that's I think that could be sort of like the counter to like you know, we're men, and so we need to either be at our little like frat in the meadows, or we need to start a revolution with our bros. I thought it was so interesting. Like, there was a point, you know, when they're actually like going around the cities and like, you know, smashing all the machines, and they're like talking about the moose and the elks and the VFW all getting together. And I'm like, these things like don't exist. I mean, they do exist, but it's all like, you know, retired dudes.
Yeah.
They don't exist for our generation. And so instead, I sort of feel like we've picked up like whoever's in our sort of internet orbit. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm a Twitter leftist. And it's still like the same impulse, right? It's like, you know, we're gonna get together online, and we're gonna sort ourselves into little categories, and then we're gonna be like, if everyone just listened to what we said, it would be better. But there's not a whole lot of doing. I mean, that's not true, because I think and I have to do this to make myself feel better, is to believe that like activism carried out online is real and meaningful. But there's also, like, I think it's also important to acknowledge that some of it isn't. Some of it is like, you know, is this same sort of impulse of like, well, if I was the one who was making these decisions, it would all be correct. And then there's not a lot of thought to, like, what happens after the revolution? How do we build it back up again? What, you know, what do we do once we've gotten our way? And so I think like the idea that there's like this girl gang that is actually sitting and talking about these things and like carrying them out. Like, we need more of that.
I think this book is a really great lesson in like your fantasies of the outcome is just not going to play out, right? Yeah. Like Paul's fantasy about the farm, Paul's fantasy about becoming the leader of the ghost shirts. He's like, I'm that guy.
Yeah,
let's do a revolution.
I joined last night, but actually it's me. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think, who was that character? The one guy who the speech changed his mind. Like that is the thing that matters more than anything else. Where it's like, yeah, you changed one guy's mind. You made him realize that, hey, maybe the system isn't what it's all cut out to be. And Ed Harrison? Is his name Ed? How many Eds are there in this book? Anyway, but like the young engineer that he sits next to at the Meadows, who's his buddy, and that guy, he is also the type of person who's just like, no, the way they treated you made me realize that this system isn't good. It isn't okay. And sure, his takeaway was also like, maybe I should go live on a farm. But I feel like that's more of a shortcoming of what Kurt Vonnegut, OG cottagecore girly, rather than like the fact that what you do and the choices you make can have outcomes, like really good outcomes that like change people's minds and helps them see things a little more clearly. But you alone aren't going to be able to stage a revolution overnight. Like change doesn't happen overnight. Meaningful, lasting change doesn't happen overnight. But you can change some minds, and that isn't something to scoff at. Like, I think in
Yeah.
this book, it's like he got somebody on the young end and then somebody who was like a head engineer at a different works. Like, those are two
Yeah.
big things in the scale. And it's like, they were relatively small acts on his part. Did he even write the speech? I completely forgot.
I thought Finnerty wrote it or Lasher wrote it while he was like out.
Right, yeah, because dude just got real high and then became the leader of a revolution.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, we
Oof.
signed your name to it because it's, you know, that makes me think too. It's like I think it's important to realize that you can impact like individual people. I mean, that's sort of what I tell myself, and like I sign off of this little live stream, and like a couple people thought about something for an hour, and that's nice.
Yeah.
But also like that you need to be very, very careful with that power. One thing that kind of kept sticking for me is that there's like a very right-wing reading of this book.
Ooh.
Where like, I don't know, like the kind of the dream of like, well, we'll go to a farm, right? Like you have the cottagecore girlies and then you have like trad wives. Who are like, you know what we all need is for women to leave the workplace and have a fuck ton of kids and, you know, churn butter so that their men can, you know, run countries and eat meats.
Yeah.
And then also like the revolution being kind of a parallel to like the January 6th, you know, insurrection, where I'm like, okay, and like kind of the individualist tone of, you know, we gotta get rid of the machines and get rid of the universal basic income and be men.
Yeah.
That, you know, I think, you know, you're right that like everybody's a little bit miserable in spite of whatever is happening in the world. And so like all of us sort of have this little internal impulse of like, well, I could make it better. I have the right understanding and everybody else is wrong. That, you know, you have to be really careful where that leads.
Yeah.
Because, I feel like both ends of the political spectrum pull on that impulse in all of us. And that's why, like, for the most part, like, I don't really buy the argument that it's like, you know, like, people are acting against their own interests and they don't know that this politician doesn't care about them. I'm like, I think everybody legitimately thinks that they're doing the right thing. It's just we disagree on what that right thing is. But I think that like people who are pulling in either direction believe that they are morally justified in doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be like, and both sides are wrong. Like,
both sides are equally bad, actually.
Yeah, like I have a pretty clear like lefty bent here. But yeah, that you just have to, you know, make sure that that you're sort of being careful with that impulse in your heart, that you're not letting anybody kind of pull on it in any direction.
Yeah. I think that the book does a pretty good job at painting the fact that Paul is not somebody to be aspired to. Paul's a silly goose. He's what a guy. But I think that it is what happens when you let your fantasies fester. I think that like this is a warning against that, because like at every single moment he, like, even when he leans in and he's like, I am that guy. Who's the leader? Me, baby. Like he leans into this fantasy constantly and it bites him in the butt. He goes and buys the farm before he consults with reality with Anita, and then Anita goes to the farm and she's like, this shucks, my guy.
Yeah. I am actually like pro running water.
Yeah. And then he goes to the meadows and he gets assigned this like job where it's like, hey, if you become like our inside guy, that's good. And then it's only at that moment where he's like, oh, actually I quit. He like loves existing in this ambiguity and fantasy where like nothing is concrete. Nothing has to be real until the consequences happen. And I think like this is a good lesson in not not existing in that space. Like, you do need to make choices. You do need to act at individual points. Like, Anita does that. Like, a lot of the smaller characters do that. The ones that Halyard goes around on tour with, where he's just like, look at these little folks. These are the normal people, and they're people who don't have the luxury of living in a fantasy, and so they make their choices. And they might not be as fulfilled, but I do find that they have like a little bit more, oh, what's the word? The word is escaping me, but they feel like they're a little bit more real, a little bit more respectable in my eyes.
Yeah. I think as we're coming to the end of our hour, that's a really beautiful sort of thing. Like, something that I like to think about in these discussions is like, okay, what does this actually make me want to leave here and do? And I think that, especially with some of the things we've been talking about, AI, climate change, all of these, existential threats, that it's really, it feels really meaningful to sit and talk about, like, well, what will happen in the future when we have to deal with these things? But like, we are already at that point. And so it's much more meaningful to engage with them than to sort of talk about, like, well, what will happen? Like, I think something that I try to do a lot with when I talk about climate is like, well, I'm trying to change my individual life, not because I think individual actions will matter, but like because I'm practicing for the life that I think that we all need to live.
Yeah.
And maybe I should be doing that more with my approach to technology, which so far has just been to be like, AI sucks. Or like, the people in charge of it suck, more accurately, I guess.
No, some AI does suck. Don't worry. You can say it with your whole chest.
Yes, but like, I think to your earlier point, like, people are working on this. It's not enough to say like, well, it shouldn't happen, because it's happening. And I don't like to say things as if they're inevitable, but like, there are people who are making money off of it, and so that is why it's going to happen. And so it's better to engage with it and try to inform how it'll be used and what it'll be used for, and point out problems, than to just say like, it's bad and we shouldn't do it. Because that's not the world we live in right now.
Yeah. And if you want to connect like AI and the current conversations around it with like beyond just the themes of technology, but the themes of like festering in a fantasy from this book, like, so much of the current AI conversation at a high level are people trying to make it seem like it's this existential thing. It's this long-term thing. We need to think about AI and how it impacts the people of the future. And it is like, it's a thing that makes a lot of people who care about responsible AI, people who do engage with AI actively and help develop it, but also care about people. It's something that they think a lot about, because who gives a shit about the people of the future, right? Because the people of the future are us in the future, you know what I mean? So protect us now. And so like, it's really important not to get caught up in these life or death scenarios, these massive existential problems and hypotheticals, when that isn't the thing that we're dealing with right now. What we're dealing with is artists. Are they being accurately licensed? Are they being paid for their work with Midjourney? Authors with large language models, are they being paid, or are they being ripped off from people's likenesses? Like, and your own user data, like, what is happening with that? There's also like more of the things about AI's use in like employment, insurance, the legal system. Like, how are those things being executed? How are all of these million startups that are like pitching to VCs every single day, and the products that they're selling, how are we regulating that today? And not like, oh, hypothetically, ChatGPT is actually going to replace all written language. Like,
Right.
shut up, shut your mouth. Let's talk about like the things that we can do concretely.
Right.
Because that is like uh, the core question that's always plagued artificial intelligence, right? The reason the Turing test exists, which is like the thing, any artificial intelligence piece of writing will just be like, well, Alan Turing developed this little quiz to see if like an AI could behave like a human. And the actual nature of the Turing test, the actual details of how it was implemented, is not as important as why. And it's because the idea of intelligence in general is too general, right?
Mhm.
Like we need solid metrics in order to do anything effective around technology and AI and machine learning, right? We need to think about things concretely. Otherwise, things just get so inefficient and so meaningless that there isn't anything that we could really do about it. It just becomes a whole lot of talk. We should be more like Anita and take action.
I like that. And this is like the once per episode obligatory mention of like how many problems of this book could be solved by a union. Where it's like, oh yeah, I mean, and you think about the writer's strike that just ended, you know, one of their demands was that studios couldn't replace a writer's room with AI. And that sort of, they took action and they demanded that rather than doing this hand wringing of like, well, is it as good a script writer as people?
Yeah.
It's just like, no, they're trained off of the stuff that we wrote, and so you're gonna pay us.
Yes. Yes. And more importantly, I think that there's this thing about humans, and when we're talking about AI, where we really are torn, like, is it intelligent? Is it conscious? Is it a human being? And it's like, that is an interesting question. Now, I could tell you right now that the current levels of technology, that is not conscious, that is not a human. That is just nowhere near to it. Like an octopus or a dog have higher levels of intelligence. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like at the end of the day, as a human, you are advocating for yourself as a human being, right? And you are allowed to say what you want. There is no technology that's like, well, it has to exist. We have no choice but to let it exist as freely as it wants to be. Because one, there are people making it. These people are obligated by legislation, by shareholders, and those people can shape what it looks like. And you are one of the stakeholders in that conversation. So you should get involved. Don't poo-poo it. Do something.
I like it. I think that's a wonderful place to leave off. So thank you again for joining me for this book discussion.
Thank you for finally getting me to finish this book, because I did recommend it when I was halfway through it, and then today started, and I was like, oh, I'm still halfway through the book.
Well, I'm glad that I finished the last 80 pages on the subway this morning, so you know we came to it fresh.
Yes, fresh and full of feelings.
Yeah. So for anyone who does not already subscribe to Answer in Progress, I believe there are links in the description of this video to go do so. Everything I've learned about AI is from Sabrina and Jordan Harrod, who is our next guest host.
Excellent taste.
Yeah, good folks. So where else should people find you? What apps are you using these days?
Oh God. To be honest, like when I mainly post on youtube.com. I look at Answer in Progress. Yep. They have ads now on YouTube. And we produce videos more than just AI. We also just generally enjoy taking a question and trying and documenting the journey to the answer. And I think that it's really important nowadays, especially when like everything seems to be driven by results, by showing you like, oh, look at this shiny new thing. And we're like, hey, it's tough to get there. And sometimes the thing at the end,
we messed up on the way.
Here's how often you mess up. Here's like how tough it is to find an answer. Here's like all of the books you need to get through to get there. And it still might not be satisfying. Like, I think that is something that we'll see more of, especially as AI like is really good at producing this polish. People want to see what happens before the polish. So we do a bunch of stuff like that. I made it sound very serious, but like one of our most recent videos was like, I wanted to know why there's so many pasta shapes. So I got a friend to make a bunch of pasta, and then we also went to like a pasta making place, and we just enjoyed pasta. I ate so much pasta that week. So it's like a silly time. We like to keep it light. Other than that, I'm on Instagram at nerdy and quirky. I don't know if that's mirrored, but nerdy and quirky, because that's a handle that I came up with when I was 13. And unfortunately, it still applies.
Amazing.
Amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Sabrina. Everybody go watch Answer in Progress, sign up for the newsletter so that
Oh, right, we do have a newsletter.
Team has a way to reach you when all of the platforms crumble.
Right. Yeah, we do have a newsletter. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm reaching off screen for the next book, which is Incredible Doom, volumes 1 and 2. Read one or both, but the second one is where it gets gay. So November 17th, I will be talking about these with Jordan Harrod, and hope that everyone joins us. I guess, yeah, we'll call it a night. Thanks.
Woohoo! Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, I've ended the stream.